Look for the premiere of the movie Batman and Jesus, produced in collaboration with King's Tower Productions as part of Myth Information Conference 4 on September 30th, 2017. An audience for the Batman and Jesus movie premiere include Seth Andrews, creator and host of The Thinking Atheist, atheist celebrity Aaron Ra, mythicist scholar Dr. Richard Carrier, Naked Mormonism podcast creator and host Bryce Blankenagel, CEO of Atheist Republic Allie Jackson, and a slew of other guests. The Myth Information Conference will include the very exciting buzzed belief debate titled Islam in the Age of Trump between Asra Nomani and Faisal Saeed al-Mutar that will be moderated by Matt Dillahunty. The conference will also include a lineup of speakers such as London-based YouTube juggernaut Sargon of Akkad, also YouTube sensations Armored Skeptic and Shoe-On Head, and Global Humanist Secular Movement editor Melissa Chen. We will also be hosting a special VIP party where VIP ticket holders will be privy to a private presentation by Ron Miscavige, father of David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, on his experience with Scientology during and after his escape. To learn more or to purchase tickets for Myth Information Conference 4, visit us at mythicistmilwaukee.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome to the Myth Informed podcast. It is late June 2017. We have Mike Lawrence with us today. Atheist, author and activist, an advocate of separation of church and state, opposes religious indoctrination. He's also a mythicist, an amateur mythicist like us. And he's got some interesting ideas on the historicity of Jesus that he's dug around that we definitely want to talk about. And pulling forth some cool, interesting pieces about like the historicity argument, as well also some kind of astrotheology, as that we're talking about that I think makes sense. When I got into mythicism, it really was, wow, these stories were actually meant to say something else. They weren't meant to be taken literally, and I think idioms in a way are stories that mean something else that, are for a purpose. So maybe this whole thing's of one massive idiom. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto the show.
Awesome. So talk to us about, there were two pieces of literature that you were making a historical argument on. The epistles, there are two different ones, and you were going to talk about why historicity comes into doubt. Which one do you want to take first?
The first epistle of Clement I'll take first, and it's more the how they have been dated and the text that's been used in order to date the letters up against the text that's been ignored when dating the letter in order to come up with a date that fits with the Jesus story to protect the Catholic and Protestant version of the Jesus story. With the first epistle of Clement, it did used to be in a Christian canon. It is in a codex that was found in the 16th century. It's a 4th century book, and in it is the Old Testament, the New Testament, plus two other works, the first epistle of Clement, second epistle of Clement. They've since been designated as dubious and taken out of the Christian canon, so they no longer form part of the canon. The epistle of Clement itself, the first epistle of Clement, it opens with the Church of God which resides at Rome to the Church of God residing at Corinth through our Lord Jesus Christ. So straight off of the bat, we've got identification of two groups worshipping a god or a demigod called Jesus in Corinth and in Rome. So the first thing we can look to on that score is, exactly when was the letter written? But more importantly, how old were these two groups when that letter was written?
Right.
And the second key fact is that the letter does not state anywhere in the letter who the author was or when it was written. But that doesn't stop organized Christianity coming up with the consensus view. So their view is that the letter is written by Bishop Clement of Rome, and it was written in 96 Common Era. And in this dating logic, they just use one paragraph from the entire epistle. More importantly, they ignore some other paragraphs which prove this date to be impossible. They go to the opening paragraph, which says, "Owing, dear brethren, to the sudden and successive calamitous events which have happened to ourselves, we feel we have been somewhat tardy in turning our attentions to the points respecting which you consulted us." And the assertion they make is that calamitous events equals Christian persecutions in Rome. Mm-hmm. Quite how they can do that, I don't know, but that's what they say. Calamitous events, that must be Christian persecutions in Rome. And then, due to Rome and Corinth's distance from Jerusalem, the event must be a substantial time frame away from their 30 Common Era crucifixion scene in order to give enough time for the spread and creation of Christian groups to Italy and Greece. And then a quick search of history identifies the persecutions of Domitian in 96 Common Era, and hey presto, the letter is therefore allocated to 96 Common Era and said to have been written by the Bishop of Rome at the time, who was Clement. The reality is that we actually have no idea who wrote the letter and no idea what the calamitous events spoken about were, when they happened, who, if anybody, was responsible. They could have even been a series of earth tremors. We actually have no idea. So that cannot actually be used to date the letter.
So the official story by then, the Catholic Church in the canon, that it was written by the bishop, the Pope, Clement, in Rome in 96 AD to talk about perhaps Christian persecution, maybe in the Colosseum or something like that. Is that the official?
No, the letter itself is a reply to a letter from Corinth about sedition in the church in Corinth. They're just saying, we've had a few calamitous events here that's delayed us responding to you. And so the church is saying, those calamitous events, they must be Christian persecutions of Domitian, therefore we can date the letter to 96.
Gotcha.
Okay. The paragraphs which actually prove that date to be completely wrong are when the author starts talking about his thoughts on the temple in Jerusalem. There's one short clip in chapter 23 which says, "The Lord shall suddenly come to his temple," which doesn't mean too much in itself, but he is talking about a temple in Jerusalem. But in chapter 24, he gets really specific. He says, "Not in every place, brethren, are the daily sacrifices offered, or the peace offerings, or the sin offerings, or the trespass offerings, but in Jerusalem only. And even there they are not offered in any place, but only at the altar before the temple. That which is being offered, first being examined by the high priest and the ministers we already mentioned." And that's quite unambiguous. Whether the temple existed or not, we have to do further examination, but certainly in this person's mind at the time that he wrote the letter, the temple existed. An interesting comment is made by Maxwell Staniforth. He did a translation of this in 1944. He marked this for a footnote, and in the footnote he writes, "At first sight, the use of the present tense seems to suggest that Clement is writing before the destruction of the temple and the consequent cessation of its sacrifices in 70 AD. No kidding." And then he says, "Such an early date for the epistle, however, is not possible. So we must assume that he's simply quoting Jewish regulations as they existed at the time. We must assume." Well, clearly we must assume nothing of the sort. Well, the only reason we must do that is because we want this 96 Common Era date to be true. Mm-hmm. This guy definitely believes the temple still exists when he writes the letter. The pre-70 dating logic would be that it's highly improbable that members of a Christian church in Rome, or even just someone living in Rome circa 96 Common Era, would have been unaware that the temple had been destroyed in 70. The temple treasures and the Jewish rebels from the war were paraded through the streets of Rome in Titus's victory parade in 71 Common Era, mm-hmm. and the Jewish rebel leaders were ritually executed in public as the parade finale. That would have been an extravaganza for everyone in Rome to see. The procession of the treasures and the captives in front of Titus are both depicted on the inside of the Arch of Titus at the entrance to the Forum in the centre of Rome, and that arch was completed in 82 Common Era, and the treasures that were seized from the temple were used to finance the construction of the Colosseum, which began in 72 and was completed in 80. So it's therefore completely reasonable to conclude that a Christian resident of Rome in 96 would have been fully aware that the temple had been destroyed and had been for 26 years. So if the author had written in 26, he would not have written about the temple and temple activities in a manner which suggests the temple still stands and still functions. But on the other hand, if he's writing before 70, a Christian resident of Rome writing before 70 about the Jewish temple would write about the temple in the affirmative, because before 70 it did exist, and this is the exact thought process displayed in the letter.
Okay, now why does in this epistle why do they care so much about Jewish law if this is a Christian pope writing to another Christian congregation?
It's not so much that they're worried about Jewish law. The response is there is some sedition taking place in Corinth. So Corinth have written to Rome and said, "Can you help us out with this? We've got some items that need clarification." And the church in Rome, are responding to them. They're giving them some guidance. It's just the fact that because the Jewish treasures and the Jewish rebels from the war were paraded through the streets, means that the letter must have been written before 70. The reason they're so keen to date it to 96 Common Era is because of the time gap issue that causes. If the letter is written before 70, we can say, well, these two groups must have existed before 70. But how long were they in existence before 70 in both Rome and Corinth in Greece? And there are other passages in the letter which are quite distinct on how long the writer perceives these two groups to have existed. Actually, very distinct on how long they've existed. First of all, before we look at those, if we were to say the Gospels are biographies, then no Christian church could exist anywhere in the world before 30 Common Era, certainly not outside of Jerusalem.
Right.
But we have in chapter 41, he says, "It is disgraceful, beloved, yea, highly disgraceful, and unworthy of your Christian profession, that such a thing should be heard of as that the most steadfast and ancient church of the Corinthians should, on account of one or two persons, engage in sedition against its presbyters." Now, again, if we look at J.B. Lightfoot's translation of this, he actually completely omits the word ancient on purpose. He just goes into the most steadfast church of the Corinthians. And then in his footnotes, he says, this epithet, ancient, seems hardly consistent with the very early date that we would assign to Clement's epistle. So he clearly saw the problem with that.
Right. So, ancient, right. At best, we could be talking about grandfathers here, right? If it was written, say, at 69, when the church was founded in 33, you're looking at 40 years.
Yeah, we've got to say one generation for ancient, and that's being conservative and generous, I think. But if we consider Staniforth and Lightfoot's comments on these two passages, we're saying in order to get to the 96 Common Era date, we now have calamitous events definitely refers to Christian persecutions, but ancient church doesn't really mean an extremely old church, and Clement just got the tense wrong when he was talking about the temple. You have to apply that logic to come up with a 96 Common Era date. To come up with a pre-70 date, you don't have to apply any logic at all. You just have to read the letter.
Yeah.
And also, I think we need to sort of bear in mind that when we talk about church here in this day and age, we're not talking about a church as a building. A church here is a collective noun for a group of people of a similar God gathering to worship. So at some time before 70 Common Era, the concept of gathering to worship a God called Jesus in Corinth is being referred to as ancient. So that we do know.
Right. It would seem if Paul's writing in his letters, right, those churches are just getting formed around, say, 40 AD.
Yeah.
Right. So, ancient is hard to apply, especially if this was written in, say, 70 or 69, that's, say, 20 years.
Exactly. I mean, Paul is mentioned in the letters, and that means we could date the letter between 55 to 70, and that would mean that this church could only possibly be between 25 and 40 years old.
Right.
if the New Testament Gospels are biographies. And that's hardly ancient. Ancient has to imply, at the very least, more than one lifetime, I would say.
But, the other thing, too, is, if we're talking historicity, and if we are referring to Paul's letters, he's not talking about a historical Jesus. Carrier's talked about this several times. He's pointed out how he's talking about a demigod, essentially. A celestial figure. So, I think that's, if we're talking about historicity, we're talking about these letters, you can have people worshiping Jesus in 70 or 40 or whenever. It doesn't mean he existed. Is that kind of, part of what you've seen as well?
Yeah. I agree with Carrier. Paul is definitely worshipping a Jesus which he considered comes from antiquity. A lot of people would say, but in 1 Galatians he said he was born of a woman and he came in the appearance of a man. But Paul definitely does not allude to a Jesus that walked the earth between 1 and 30 Common Era. Yeah. Absolutely not. And then for the New Testament Gospels to be biographies, we need Paul to be saying, this guy did exist and he existed between 1 and 30. However, he would do that in the letters, but he doesn't. He only refers to him in a very distant sense.
Mm-hmm. And the Roman figures themselves were born of women. Even if he's saying Jesus is born of a woman, that's great. So were all the Roman gods, the Greek gods, the Egyptian gods.
Right.
That's not really, that's not.
Yeah.
But it does. It seems to doubt the historicity, because if you read the Gospels, right, as Jesus is crucified, and this is supposed to be in 33, that the temple sheet rips open. These kind of things. It seems like the exposure, almost the destruction of the temple, the earthquakes, almost suggest that this is the temple destruction in, say, 70, and when the Gospels are written, post 70. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's allegory. In the way, are the Gospels a sort of fan fiction for people that already buy the narrative of, say, a celestial Jesus?
The Gospels were written for a theological answer as to why God allowed the Romans to come in and destroy Jerusalem and the temple. Mm-hmm. I could get it. It would flow if I come to that a little bit later, but without a doubt, the Gospels are not biographies. They are a theological answer to a massive problem that the Jews in Jerusalem had just witnessed. Mm-hmm. Their place of sacrifice to gain forgiveness of sins and entry to heaven has just been destroyed. And they needed some answers to why that happened, and they found it in the Old Testament, and then they created the New Testament stories from it. Mm-hmm. But I could come to that a little later. Just to finish off Clement, there are a couple of other passages in there which again strengthen the longevity argument. In chapter 22, the guy that's writing the letter from Rome is actually telling off the people from Corinth. He's scolding them about things they've been saying. He uses some scripture to do it, but he's using past tense scripture in a present tense message. He says to them, you're saying these things we have heard even in the times of our fathers, but behold, we have grown old, and none of them have happened unto us. So he's saying you shouldn't, he's telling them you shouldn't be saying things like that. You've got to stay faithful. You've got to stay true. But that strongly suggests 2 generations within the church in Corinth at the time the letter's being written. And there is an epilogue to the letter which doesn't appear in many translations, but does appear in Maxwell Staniforth's translation. And it says, "We have sent envoys to you of trustworthiness and discretion, whose lives here among us have been irreproachable from youth to age." So if these 2 guys that Rome sent with a letter have been with the church in Rome from birth and they're now of age, that would then make the church in Rome older than them. Right. And the letter was written before 70. If you group all of this together, we've got a letter sent from a Christian group in Rome to a Christian group in Corinth. It's written between 55 and 70. And it makes the following statements about the longevity. It says that the church in Corinth is ancient. The parishioners have grown old and complain about claims and promises made to them that they know were made to their parents. And the envoys of the letter are old and been with the church in Rome since birth. So the church in Rome would be older than the envoys. And the church in Corinth would be older than them, having been referred to as ancient. And if we're being very, very conservative here and very generous, we could say 40 years. So if we say 1.5 generations, 40 years, that places a Christian church in Rome and a Christian church in Corinth before the 30 Common Era crucifixion scene of the New Testament, which, of course, if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are biographies, would be totally impossible. But if the New Testament Gospels are simply plagiarized and morphed versions of an ancient Jesus God, it's entirely feasible, and that's exactly what they are, and that's why this letter works if it's written before 70.
So if you were an apologist, if someone who was going to take the contrary, you'd almost have to say that for that church to be ancient, that it was a church existing of some other kind, that then that they all converted, and that it was a Christian church, and they're saying ancient because it was that. But is there any evidence of something like that?
Well, he does actually say that it is the most. Well, he says the most steadfast and ancient church of the Corinthians, but they're constantly talking about this church being a church of Jesus Christ. So, and the church of Jesus Christ presumably either existed after 30, if the Catholics and the Protestants are correct, or there are many allegorical versions of a Jesus that have been worshipped throughout history. We just don't have that literature anymore because it's been destroyed by the Catholic Church in a more 900, 1,000 year eradication process that began after 325. Any literature about an allegorical version of a Jesus character that came to light was just simply destroyed.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, Mike, is this a surprise to you? I mean, when you look at the passage in Josephus, when you look at all the forgeries that exist, when you look at the Gospels that they decided not to take, I mean, if we look at the Nag Hammadi scriptures that were found where Jesus is raping his mother and the cross comes to life and starts talking, how come this isn't
massive
part of
giant cross that talks? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, so it's like, is it surprising to you that they're trying to, fit this in a timeline that doesn't fit? It just seems like that's what their practice is always try to square the circle, to quote Brian here. He likes to use that.
Exactly. Don't forget, this letter came to light in the 1700s. It had been in a book since the 4th century, and it came to light in the 1700s. Well, by that time, the people burning and the book burning process had finished. And this came to light, and it's, we've got to explain this away. Yeah. And it's explained away basically by giving it an incorrect date in order to protect the Jesus story. I'm pretty sure that if this book had been found in the post 325 period, the entire thing would have been destroyed. Yeah. And we would never have known about it.
Right. Yeah. If the Nag Hammadi scriptures weren't buried in Egypt, we wouldn't have those either. And it's really good.
And they were buried for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. And for those that don't know, the Nag Hammadi scriptures were the Gospels that were written in Egypt that tells a completely different story of Jesus. And there's many Gospels that exist that aren't in your Bible. They just were never accepted by the Catholic Church. And in a lot of cases, to Mike's point, they were destroyed for good reason, because they're telling a different story of Jesus and what he did and what he said. And when you control the narrative, as the Catholic Church did, you control the people. So,
and heresies are bad. You don't want factional groups opposing you based on a heresy. So sometimes burning that literature is one way to get rid of that, or at least stop the spread of it.
Later, when we come to the schism, I've got some entries from the Codex Theodosian, which are the edicts against pagan beliefs and heresies. They're pretty brutal, but we'll come to that, I think, at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. So now, does that, and anything more on like the first epistle of Clement, or should we go into the epistle of Barnabas?
Let's look at the epistle of Barnabas. For me, the first epistle of Clement is a clincher. Without a doubt, these groups existed before the 30 Common Era crucifixion scene through mutual exclusivity. That's the proof. The Jesus character is not real. He is an adaptation of an earlier myth. Barnabas, if I am right on Barnabas, that's just letter number 2. We only need one, but that would be letter number 2. And I will admit, I could be wrong on Barnabas on the date. I don't think I am. But even if I'm not, the date that it would apply to it, 130 Common Era, is still problematic to the Jesus story. But the Barnabas, the Epistle of Barnabas, not the Gospel of Barnabas, that's a separate work.
Correct. That's more of an Islamic scripture, right? The Gospel of Barnabas.
I'm not too sure. I've not read the Gospel of Barnabas. I do know that it's out there. It's believed to be a late forgery, but it's not related to the Epistle of Barnabas.
Correct.
So
I think it supports more the Islamic version of Jesus. But go on. So we're talking specifically the Epistle.
Yeah, and the allocation to Barnabas is irrelevant to us. We have no idea who wrote the letter. The guy who's writing the letter doesn't give away his identity. The consensus is that the letter was written between 70 and 130. Now, the document, in my mind, could be interpreted date-wise in one or two ways. My contention is that it was written 500 BCE. Now, that's a fantastic claim, and I'm sure it will raise some eyebrows. I'd like to know whether I can get any support for these ideas, or maybe if anybody could call in afterwards and say that's not possible because. I've been promoting this for about 7 or 8 years now. I've not yet had anyone say what you say is not possible because. So it's still open to being shot down, if you like. So it's either 500 BCE or it's post 130. It cannot possibly be, as the consensus says, between 70 and 130. The letter talks of the activity of building a temple in Jerusalem. And this happened in 500 BCE. The second temple was built. May have happened after 130. Between 70 and 130, Jerusalem was derelict. There was nobody there, and there certainly wasn't any temple building activity. So that date range is impossible. Like Clement, the post-130 possibility requires added interpretation that's not actually in the letter itself in order to come to that date. But if you just read the letter and nothing more than just read the letter, you and if you wipe clean the New Testament gospel stories from your mind, you come up with 500 BCE quite easily, and that doesn't require any massaging of the text at all. It just falls naturally into that date.
Okay, now, and to recap some of the history, you're saying, okay, there's a Jewish temple that exists, sometime built in 700, 800 BC, and then Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians move in, destroy the temple in 587.
586, yeah.
Okay, take prisoners, and then kind of Daniel and Cyrus, and then back around 500 BC or so, or BCE, so 500 BC, temple gets rebuilt, and that's the one that exists until 70. Common area, exactly. And that is destroyed by the Romans.
Destroyed by the Romans, yeah. Right. So there is a temple destruction, a temple rebuild, and a temple destruction. Okay. In 586, 516, 500, and then again in 70 Common Era. Now, the letter itself, he's addressing this letter to people who he's describing as rejoicing in the Torah of God. That's quite specific. He does say, you are rejoicing in the Torah of God. So we're probably talking about Christianized Jews here rather than Gentiles or non-Jews. That's debatable, but he does say that. You are rejoicing in the Torah of God. The author is actually, throughout the letter, complaining about a return to the strict interpretation of the Torah and a reconstruction of a temple to Yahweh. And he's asking the people to reject the idea of a brick temple to Yahweh and the old covenant with God. He's suggesting that they keep to, so some people already were, or join, so some people weren't, the new covenant with the Messiah Jesus. And this Jesus, in his letter, is reported to be present at the creation of the world. Now, that's a Gnostic idea, not a Catholic or a Protestant Christian idea. That's a Gnostic idea. He states that the new covenant with Jesus was made at exactly the same time the old covenant was broken. So reading his Old Testament, Moses comes down the mountain with the commandments. He sees the people are worshipping idols. And the author's saying at that moment, the covenant with the Jewish people was broken, but at the same time, a new covenant was made with his Jesus. That is not Christian in the modern sense.
No, not at all.
Not at all. He then says that Jesus will return to usher in the 8th age when he destroys the evil one. So that's quite apocalyptic. And the other important fact about his Jesus is his Jesus rose from the dead, revealed himself, but not to any specific characters, and ascended to heaven all on the same day, all in one go. Bosh, straight up to heaven.
Yeah.
Again,
efficiency. He's not messing around.
Yes, very efficient, but not very New Testament. Acts gives us a 40-day gap, and loads of people come in to see the risen Jesus. So not New Testament at all. So you could say in this letter, then, where is the New Testament? The letter contains no New Testament content at all. The 50 to 55 epistles, no mention of them or their content, or the post-70 Gospels. And that is a hard fact, and it is quite telling when you read it. There is a translation by Jackson Snyder and Theodore Dornan, who say that the reason they did the translation is saying we're quite fed up with reading translations. The letter we have is in Greek, by the way, from Greek to any vernacular that's favourable to modern Christian ideas. And they said, we are going to do a true translation of this. We're going all of the place names, the names and the collective nouns, we're going to give them the proper translation. We're not going to Christianise them into the modern world. And this is their words. They say, according to the best scholars, the author at no time quotes or cites the books of the New Testament, nor does the author use the word Christian, nor does he refer to Christianity or Christ at all. Whenever Jesus is mentioned in this letter, he's mentioned as the Master or the Messiah, but not Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side, the letter is full of Old Testament quotes. It's absolutely jam-packed with Old Testament quotes that come from circa 600 to 500 BCE. Isaiah and Daniel, basically, the exile period and the return from Babylon. So there are a few reasons for problems with the 70 to 130 consensus. They start off with, well, there's a mention of a temple destruction, and so they automatically say, well, that must be the 70 Common Era destruction, mustn't it? It would be ridiculous to say it's the 586 BCE destruction. So that's not from scholarship, that's from necessity. And there is a presumption there. That is, the Bible, the New Testament Gospels are biographies. There's an assumption. So that leads them to 70 Common Era.
Sure. Now, one of the things, since we're going back so far in time here, 600 plus years, would there be Jews that knew how to speak Greek at that time? Obviously, in this period in 586 BC, Greek is the Greek civilization's huge, right? Athens, Sparta. Are there Jews that far, northwest of, say, Palestine and Israel?
Right. Here's the interesting thing on what you've just said there. The translation by Jackson Snyder and Theodore Dornan say the origin of the letter is Aramaic translated into Greek. We've got a Greek copy. They are saying that the original was written in Aramaic. That fits quite nicely. And it also begs another question. If the letter is written after 130, would it be written in Aramaic or would it have been written in Greek? My contention would be if it was written after 130 in this area, it would have been written in Greek, just like the rest of the entire content of the New Testament. If it was written 500 BCE in this area, it would have been written in Aramaic. And these two guys are saying the original, from their knowledge of Greek and how to translate, they're saying that the original was written in Aramaic.
Interesting. I guess when did Aramaic go out? When did that start to fade out as a language that these scriptures were written in?
It's never actually it's not faded out completely, but it went out of fashion in the Middle East. Quite when, I don't know, but what we do know as a fact is that the New Testament epistles of Paul are 50 to 55, and the Gospels are post 70. And they were all written in Greek originally. We've got Greek copies, but the originals were in Greek. We also know that the written language, or the standard written language of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, so that's all the way from the Levant up to Babylon, was Aramaic. Okay. So in this time period, in this era, it would have made sense to have written a letter in Aramaic. And these two guys are saying, in their opinion, the original was written in Aramaic.
So, right. So, okay, but then what if someone says, like, well, what's the significance of Barnabas? Why what if you were an apologist and you said, okay, well, fine, that is an older letter. It's just misdated. Well, how does that debunk historicity of Jesus?
Well, if it's talking about a temple destruction and a temple rebuild. So if the temple destruction is the 586 BCE Nebuchadnezzar destruction and the rebuild is the return from Babylon, he's talking about the rebuild in the present tense. It says, behold, those who pulled the temple down shall rebuild it. The very thing which is actually in the process of fulfillment now. Other translations I've got about 10, 15 translations. They say things like, it is happening, it has happened, they are doing it. They're building this temple as he's writing the letter. That's only happened once in history, and it's circa 500 BCE. When the second temple was destroyed in 70 Common Era, it was never rebuilt. Mm-hmm. So we're saying, okay, then this letter, there is strong evidence to say this letter is actually seriously misdated, and the original content comes from 500 BCE, circa 500 BCE, and it talks about a God called Jesus being crucified and coming back to life as retribution as a savior for our sins.
Yeah, so a much earlier version, yeah,
of a Jesus character. Mm-hmm. Now, and that's all this Jesus character does. Mm-hmm. He just dies and comes back to life. There's no story at all.
Yeah, that can be argued too in the book of Zechariah. We've covered that in the past.
But the Messiah is coming, though. There would have been a lot of predictions, right? Again,
well, the Jews were constantly predicting the Messiah was coming. That was one of their.
But could you claim that this is just yet somebody predicting this? Or is there any mention in these predictions that it's going to come in the form of a man named Jesus?
Oh no, he says this guy's Jesus has already arrived and been crucified and risen and gone to heaven, and he will be coming back to usher in the 8th age. Mm-hmm. So if this guy is writing in 500, he's saying that the prophecy of Isaiah has already been fulfilled,
and he's using Jesus. So if you have Christians at that time, say in 500 BC. Then now historicity is wrecked, as in the Gospels, and it's taking place in Pontius Pilate and all of that.
Yeah. And that actually is another telling point in this letter. He has one chapter on explaining the resurrection of Jesus and what it means. And when he explains that, he uses Isaiah. I can't remember the number. He uses Isaiah and Psalm 22. So this is, if he was writing between 70 and 130, this would be 600-year-old prophecy that is using to explain to people the mainstay of the Christian idea. You would have thought, well, if he was writing 130, why doesn't he use the more recent 60-year-old Gospels, which are supposed to be an actual account of the actual thing?
And there's no mention of Pauline texts either, right? There's nothing Pauline about this either.
No, there's nothing Pauline about that. No, it's another version of a Jesus character. Yeah. But if people were to challenge that, you could say, well, hold on, consider writing today an entire dissertation on the history of the theory of evolution, and not once mentioning Charles Darwin.
Right.
That would be comparable to someone in 130 writing an explanation of the reason of the resurrection and not once making reference to the New Testament Gospels.
Right.
But there's a reason for that. It's because it wasn't written in 130. It was written in 500 BCE. And he's using the scripture of the time, which is Isaiah's prophecy of a Messiah to come, and Psalm 22.
Now, this epistle,
exactly what he does use.
This epistle was never canon like the epistle of Clement. Is that correct? Or was this ever portion?
It's in the Codex Sinaiticus. Yeah, this one's in the Codex Sinaiticus. So, this is a 4th century copy, so it was in the canon at one stage, but it's not in the canon now. And again, I suppose this may be may have been a candidate for destruction. But there are a few more copies of this letter than there are of ancient copies of this letter than there are of Clement.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But it does seem that it was in the canon at one stage and then was taken out as disputed.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think you definitely have an argument there. I fear, and us being mythicist Milwaukee, I mean, we've delved into this, over the last 4 years. We've done a lot of research and stuff. I just fear the layman, the common person, just gets lost in the weeds, and it's hard. I think the challenge for us is always to somehow come up with a way to explain to people why we feel Jesus didn't exist in an elevator pitch. And, what you're doing, the scholarly work that needs to be done, and, Carrier and Fitzgerald, all these guys. But, sometimes it's so challenging when we're talking about Barnabas, when we're talking about Clement, or, I guess, what are some of the things, I know you talk about how Christianity spread through force. That's a really great point that you make. When you get into Constantine, when you get into Rome, the people really didn't have a choice, and people don't, they don't understand why they believe what they believe today.
Yeah, it's kind of a universal Stockholm syndrome. People were forced to believe it for so long that eventually the people actually did believe. Is the general and that's why so many people in the world today believe they've been told constantly by their priests and their teachers, who in turn were told by their priests and their teachers, who were told by their priests. It's just been the consensus for so long, and you can go back to a stage whereby you were not allowed to question it. It would be detrimental to your health. Go back a bit further and it would be detrimental to your life. So that's why we have this psyche today, and why we have to do this. Well, hold on, people. Let's just look at this sensibly, because as you said at the beginning, the narrative that's come down to us from 325 onwards has been totally controlled by the Catholic Church every inch of the way. People and books were burned to make the Jesus character seem real. Any book that came to light that would challenge that view was destroyed, and anyone found in possession of such a book was destroyed along with the book.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of material that we know did exist, but we don't know the content of, because the content's been destroyed beyond recovery by the Catholic Church. And obviously they did that for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's and so when you have conversations with people that are fervent believers, and they don't understand they understand what they believe, they don't understand why, and you start telling them how the Trinity is just a concept that was later introduced, how the one God thing doesn't, that wasn't with us. Jesus, he has many different stories. The Constantine thing is, I think, one of the most powerful pieces to this. And I was just in Rome a month back, and I got to see the Arch of Constantine, and the story of him at the Milvian Bridge, where he supposedly found Christianity, and Christ came down and told him he was going to win the war. But on the Constantine's Arch, you see no Christian symbology. There's nothing up there that represents Jesus, and it's all the pagan Roman gods that are behind him in battle.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Constantine was a pagan at the time of Milvian Bridge and the four-way civil war. After the four-way civil war, he found himself the sole emperor of the entire Roman Empire, and he looked for a unifying religion. Now, he could have picked Mithra. And the interesting thing there is, if he did pick Mithra, we would be having a conversation now about whether Mithra was true, real or mythical.
Exactly.
And if you went out in the streets and said to someone, "What do you think of Jesus Christ?" they would say, "Jesus who?"
Yep.
We just would not know. So if it wasn't for Constantine winning that four-way civil war and deciding on one unifying religion, we just wouldn't have the Jesus concept today. And the only reason he did that is his mother, Helena, happened to be a literalist Christian rather than an allegorical Christian. So I'll pick that religion. And a lot of people in the East were Gnostic Christians. So that gave him a lot of instant appeal to a large group of people in a land that he just conquered, basically.
Yeah. Can you explain that, the literalist Christians versus the allegorist?
Okay. So the temple is destroyed in 70 Common Era, and prior to the temple being destroyed, and this is quite a telling fact, we've got quite a lot of Christian literature. None of the pre-70 Christian literature has the New Testament narrative in it at all. None of it. The New Testament narrative, the story of Jesus, the nativity, the missionary, the betrayal. That is all written in work after 70, after the temple's destroyed. The reason it was written was to give a theological answer as to why God has just allowed the Romans to come and destroy our temple or God's home. And the number 70 just incidentally happens to be a very venerated astrological number. We could cover that in a little while as to why, but the number 70 is a serious religiously venerated number. And there is a passage in Daniel which says that the word of the Lord, which is the Messiah, another name for Jesus, came to Jeremiah the prophet and said, I will accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. That was written around 600 Common Era. The Jews, just after the temple destruction, basically have just taken their old Messianic scripture. They've seen this particular passage and said, hey, look, clearly the Messiah did come and we rejected him. It says this will happen in the Old Testament, and look what's just happened. So the Jesus story ends up being a reverse construction around the temple destruction date to place the appearance of Jesus on earth 70 years, exactly 70 years before the temple destruction, 28th year of Augustus. And the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do exactly that. Beg your pardon, Matthew, Mark, and Luke do exactly that, 28th year of Augustus. The character that they write in their story is crucified at the age of 30, another astrological number, by the way, in Jerusalem, because the text says it was Jerusalem that will suffer. It's done at Passover, because that's the spring equinox, and the Jews celebrated the spring equinox, and so did all of the mystery religions and the Gnostic religions. So the story all fits with existing allegorical Jesus stories, their Messianic scripture, and Gnostic beliefs. They just create this new story, which ends up being an answer to why the temple's been destroyed.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I imagine if you're that depressed person at the time, it's probably a lot easier to think God has punished us because we've screwed up and missed, that we've rejected the Messiah, than our religion isn't real and we just got roughed up by a very powerful force.
Exactly,
human force.
Yeah, there has to be a theological answer as to why that happened. Exactly. And interestingly also, the only way the Jewish population at the time perceived that they could enter heaven was to give sacrifice at the altar in the Temple of Jerusalem and nowhere else. That's just been destroyed. They needed another theological route to heaven. And the Gnostic Christians, they were the guys. They had this answer. It's a case of, we've got a once-off vicarious redemption act for us. We don't have to worry about sacrificing. It's already been done. Okay, we like that idea. We'll take that. Now we've still got our entry to heaven, and we've got an answer as to why the temple's been destroyed. That's the Jesus story. The reason for Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate, it's just that they've done their maths, and they've said, well, they're the characters that were in the city 40 years ago at the time. They're the characters we put in our story. And they're the date stamp. They're the characters that make it exactly 70 years before the advent of their Jesus figure. But the question that we ask is, what about the schism? So before the temple's destroyed, there's lots of Jesus theologies. They're all allegorical. They're all Gnostic. When the temple's destroyed, this breakaway Jewish people create another Jesus story to add to the mix. But this one is supposed to be a biographical story of a real Jesus. That gives us a schism, literalist Christians and allegoricalist Christians, and that existed all the way up to Constantine's success in 325. And we have a lot of literature that shows us that schism existed in that time period. Perversely enough, although the Catholic Church destroyed all the Gnostic literature that they could find, they actually wrote polemics against the Gnostic beliefs. So they've been kept for us in that form. So we know quite a bit. We know that schism existed. When Constantine became emperor, he made religion a state religion, and then his successors, particularly Theodosius, Honorius, and Valentinian III, started to brutally enforce that religion and put measures in place to get rid of the schism. In other words, to eradicate all of the other forms of Jesus worship.
And other religions as well.
Or force them to change? Because, I mean, kind of the whole point to unify the East is because these are Gnostic Christians in the first place,
forces
right?
them to convert.
But they're trying to say, no, you're doing it wrong.
Well, you're doing it wrong, or if you're a different religion, it's forcing you to convert.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was done in stages as well. Just you said, first of all, they started first on the pagans. We've got from the edicts that were written by Constantine's son, 341. Superstition shall put my teeth in. Superstition. That's easy for you to say. Superstition shall cease, and the madness of sacrifices shall be abolished. If any person should be proved to devote their attention to sacrifice or to worship images, we command that they will be subject to capital punishment. That's the death penalty for pagan sacrifices.
Wow, and that's only 11 years after Constantine in 330. Wow.
Yeah, very close. Constantius and Constance, 346. Temples are to be closed everywhere so as to deny all abandoned men the opportunity to commit sin. Anyone guilty of the crime of sacrificing must be struck down with the avenging sword, and provincial governors who fail to enforce the edict are subject to execution. The owners of the lands and the governors of the lands are being told, you stop this or we'll kill you as well. Mm-hmm. That's taking care of the pagans, as you say, very shortly after the Council of Nicaea. Now we move into Honorius, Theodosius II, Valentinian III. There is a work called the Codex Theodosius. They put together a collection of all of the edicts that have been passed over the last 150 years in one volume. We've got items like Honorius and Theodosius, 415. Those who publicly assembled to practice heretical rites may have their property taken and be executed. Heretical here, not pagan. Heretical meaning alternate Jesus beliefs. Yeah. So we're talking about here Gnostics being executed for practicing heretical rites. Theodosius II. Eunomians and monetists are to be expelled from the cities, and if they reside in the country and should hold assemblies, they are to be deported, and the owners of the land they inhabit punished. Heretical books are to be destroyed. There you go, evidence there that alternate Jesus literature was gathered and destroyed. This is the Catholic Church, as you say, controlling the narrative. Those who refuse to surrender such books are to suffer capital punishment on the charge of sorcery. If you were caught with a Gnostic Jesus book, the book was burnt and so were you. Hence, the Nag Hammadi books were buried in the ground, and we managed to find them. It goes on and on. I've got about 15 examples here. Obviously, we won't go into it. But if we then move into the reign of Charlemagne.
That's like 800 AD or so.
Yeah, 786 to 814. He rampages Saxony. And in all of the tribes, these were pagan tribes at the time, and in all of the tribes that he conquered, they were given two choices: accept my God and baptism now, or go and meet your God now. And hence, all of Europe becomes Christian. You know, you wouldn't you, at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think most people, are going to take the path of least resistance. But like after Nicaea, there's a Council of Chalcedon too, of which I think that's where the Coptic Church breaks off because they don't accede to some like the supremacy of the Pope. How is the Coptic Church survive annihilation? You know, living in say North Africa, which was part of the Roman Empire at that time. Is it just they're losing some of that territory in North Africa? I mean, how does the Coptic Church make it? It's just
I've got to be honest, I've not really studied that much, but we do have the situation, don't we, of two, the East and the West. The East is I believe the Coptic and the Orthodox Church are holding different views on the Eucharist, different views on the idea of the Trinity, and they break away. And there were times in history as well where there was more than one pope. You know,
and people infallibility.
There's only ever been one pope. There used to be like there was a pope in Germany and a pope in Italy, and now they would all raise their own armies and try and fight each other to be the one pope. So how the Coptics managed to survive all this, I've not really gone into that, but as you say, it is the fact. And once we got down to the Catholic version of Christianity, immediately you get breakaways, don't you? And different versions of Catholic, and then the Protestants come along and say, "Well, hold on, you're just using this for money, and really anybody is entitled to read the Word of God, so we'll print all the Bibles in the vernacular."
Yeah.
But then the Protestant church became no more than another version of the Catholic Church. So we got all of the breakaway nonconformist Protestant and Anglican religions. And so it goes on. So there's never really been a time in history where any one denomination has held the massive sway. But probably the closest we get to total conformity, which was enforced, was just after Constantine, when they started to put these edicts in place to eradicate alternate forms and to enforce the Catholic view.
Sure. And so maybe like some of the more extreme versions are taking place in the Western Roman Empire, and things are working a little bit differently in the Eastern Roman Empire.
It's hard to, I suppose, fully control an entire empire, isn't it? I mean, you put other people in charge and then they start to exercise their own ideas. And even the persecutions against Christians before Constantine, they were never, they were never total. They were spasmodic here and there. They might be in this area for 2 or 3 years, and then it would die out, and then pop up in another area of the world for about a year, and it would die out. It's not like the Catholic Church tell us that the Christians suffered eternal damnation and being burnt and fed to the lions, the way that Eusebius would tell us, or Origen. It didn't actually happen like that.
But it's very similar to today. I mean, you'll have Lutherans that don't really understand what their belief system is and how it differs from Catholics. Yes. I mean, but what Constantine did and what the Roman Empire did was simplify it in a lot of ways. They Jesus. There was a lot of different stories of Jesus, of what he was, who he was, and coming together, making him the Son of God, not a demigod, not an angel. That was a big thing with the Trinity. And then also, streamlining a lot of the, like, for instance, Christmas. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, but it was such a popular holiday in Rome, Saturnalia, and the solstice. Let's put it there.
Well, it gives a motive.
So it's simplified a lot of it. So even though, West Rome, East Rome, even the Middle East, whatever, they have a simplified enough story, like people today. They know the birth of Jesus, they know that story, they know Christmas, Easter, all of these things. There's just certain things that kind of unifies them, even though they're not agreeing on the full narrative of the story.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the concept of having Jesus celebrate his birth on the 25th of December was to basically originally overlay on top of existing pagan beliefs, so that it wasn't you were all celebrating on the same day, and then eventually assimilate and drown out the other beliefs, so that we are now saying resurrection at the spring equinox and birthday at the winter solstice. It's been like that for centuries for all beliefs, but we've slowly managed to edge out the other beliefs because we've kind of hijacked their ceremonies, laid our religion over the top of them, and then we've enforced our religion.
Their traditions, their symbology, a lot of the stories.
That makes it easier to digest because, I mean, this is motive to me. I'm seeing motive.
Well, these are stories that existed with humanity for millennia, and they're just putting different names and different...
but think about it. If you're an emperor of Rome and you've got this massive area, I mean, you're dealing with an enormous amount of tribalism. I mean, the people in Spain are not interacting with the people in Alexandria for the most part, right? Most people aren't. So you've got a lot of tribalism. Unifying it through an ideology, namely religion, is a way to get unity with all of this tribalism going on.
And you brought up the Coptic Church, and if you look at them, they still use ancient Egyptian language and symbols and even symbology. They still have, the Ankh of life, and they have a lot of the ancient Egyptian symbology within Christianity. But they consider themselves Coptic Christians, but they if you go to a Coptic church, it's going to be completely different than if you go to a Catholic or Lutheran.
And which is actually a good segue, because I think in that Coptic tradition, based on the Egyptian tradition, brings us to that number 70. And I think what I read from you, Mike, is that it was 70 days to do the mummification process. That's the way to do it properly. Is that right?
Yes, in the Egypt, the Pharaoh's mummification process had to take exactly 70 days. A quick rundown on 70. It's really interesting. And I say this is the information that people don't get taught in religious studies.
And this is really cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so 70/72, basically they're astrological numbers. They're two numbers used in storytelling, but they're derived from the same astrological event. It's how long it takes the stars to move 1 degree on the horizon in years. It's 70 years in a solar base year and 72 in a lunar base year.
Right. And what, for people that don't get what that means, so like at that time, right, because the Earth is tilting back and forth, wobbling like a top. So in this ancient time that we're talking about, in ancient Greece, the Southern Cross would have been visible from that latitude, whereas now you really have to get down to the Caribbean and really south to really see it. And that's what we mean by it takes 70 years for those stars to move 1 degree.
Yeah, they realized that the fixed firmament wasn't actually fixed, that it was moving on the horizon. Well, it wasn't actually moving on the horizon. As you say, the Earth was wobbling, which created this movement. But over time, they realized this, and basically that's how we get the astrological ages, so that they look at the spring equinox sunrise every year and see which star sign it's rising in. Mm-hmm. And then they realize that that's moving. So over a period of, I think it's 1,250 years, it moves out of one star sign and into the next. That dawns a new age, a new star sign. So we've been through the age of Aries, Taurus, Aries. We're currently in the age of Pisces, and in about 100 years' time, we'll move into the age of Aquarius. Mm-hmm. But so this was basically a giant astrological clock. This 70/72 was called a great day. And as such, the numbers were extremely venerated in many cultures and in many different mythologies. So the activity of including astrological numerology in mythological allegory, that's not easy to say, it was a very popular trait. But with reference to 70/72, we've got the Greek Old Testament is called the Septuagint. Literally, that means the 70. Mm. And according to texts within the Jewish Talmud, King Ptolemy once gathered 72 elders and placed them into 72 chambers, and they translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek. So a book called the 70 was written by 72 scribes. Islamic Hadith 2687 says the smallest reward for the people of heaven is an abode where there are 72 maidens. 72 because Islam uses a lunar calendar. There is selection between the two numbers as well within the Hebrew, Greek, and Latin versions of text. So for the number of Noah's descendants, in the Hebrew Bible there are 70. In the Septuagint, the Greek version, there are 72. The number of apostles appointed by James in the New Testament, depending on which translation you're reading, sometimes it's 70, sometimes it's 72. Now, these bits are interesting. There is a time gap, an exact time gap of 70 years between the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE and the supposed completion of the second temple in 516 BCE. The Old Testament says that it was completed in the 6th year of King Darius. That's 516 BCE. It wasn't. It was completed at some stage during King Darius's reign. But the person writing the reverse prophecy wanted to create a 70-year gap. So he says 516.
Yeah, and that probably would have been perceived if you were smart and you got this. Yeah. You would have liked that at that time because these are good. These are feel-good numbers. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There is not a lot of people know this. There is a time gap of exactly 70 years between the Hijra of Muhammad, year 0 in the Islamic calendar, and the completion of the Dome of the Rock in 691-692 Common Era. Now, an Islamic, that's 70 years, but an Islamic year is shorter than a Western year, and 691-692 equates to year 72 after Hijra, AH, in the Islamic calendar, 72. Wow, there's We already mentioned in Egypt, the Pharaoh's mummification process had to take exactly 70 days. So what about Judaism? Were the Jews, does the Old Testament, was that hooked up on the number 70 in any way? I won't go through all of these. There's not enough time, but just quickly, Genesis 4:24, Lamech will be avenged 70 and sevenfold. Exodus 1:5, 70 souls come from the loins of Jacob. Numbers 7:13, and his offering was 1 silver bowl of 70 shekels. Judges, thus God slayed his 70 brethren. Rada. It goes on. I've got about 30 of these. So we can say, without a doubt, 70 was a seriously venerated number. And it was venerated for the Jews. It's in the New Testament as well. It's in the apocryphal stuff that didn't get into the New Testament, the use of the number 70. Now, when we look at the prophecy of Daniel, which says, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord, the Messiah, came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. And then we see that the destruction of Jerusalem just happens to be 70 AD in the Christian calendar, because it's 70 years after the supposed birth of their Messiah. That just smacks of reverse construction.
Yeah, no, it does. And this knowledge would have been available, right? I mean, the people have been charting the stars since forever, but the Egyptians would have been well aware of this 70, even if they didn't know why. They would have been able to count it, keeping records. I mean, they were building their own temples and pyramids to line up with some of these events. Yes, yeah. The pyramids at Giza are perfectly aligned to the cardinal points. The Sphinx, it's a carving in a rock originally. It's been built on, but that rock faces the spring equinox sunrise. I would guess that it probably the head is much smaller than the body. If the head has been recarved, it was probably, I don't know, this is just a guess, the head of a lion originally, because on the spring equinox sunrise at the time that they built it, it was rising into Leo. Who knows? It's a possibility. And the three pyramids of Giza are an exact footprint for the three stars of Orion's belt. Not only is the dog leg precise, the third star is only half as bright as the other two stars, and the third pyramid, the dogleg pyramid, is only half the size of the other two. Without a doubt, they were building what they saw in the sky on the ground. So they were very astrological. Right.
And I personally think this is lost on modern society. I mean, because we have so much, we're on computers, on our phones, we have so many distractions in life, but it always has made sense to me if you go back to the ancient world and, you're sitting on a Saturday night with nothing to do, you're looking at the stars, or you're
looking at the greatest show on earth.
Exactly. And this is where all of these religious stories come from. All these mythologies come from. This is the origin of them, of people looking at the stars, creating their own stories that mirrored the human experience, and also shared scientific knowledge, like when the animals are coming back, when the trees and plants are going to die, when they're going to come back. But then it also helped people navigate. I mean, they were extremely important.
Yeah, I think, but just the human. I mean, if you compare like what's going on in Egypt, obviously they have a big civilization. They have an enormous amount of engineering. But you just even in the Americas before Columbus, before the Vikings. I mean, these people were living a celestial life too, moving their camps based on the stars, making their camps look like the stars, and their stars look like the camps. They believed that this was
exactly
a holy life to live.
Exactly. Well, not only that, it drives me even more crazy when I see Islam and they have the crescent moon as their symbol, and they worship in Mecca where the moon god was worshipped once.
Exactly.
And they borrowed all of these moon god terms, and I mean, it's like, how do you not know where this is coming from?
Oh yeah, well, Bart Ehrman in Did Jesus Exist? He says that there are claims that there are astrological influences in the Jesus New Testament gospel. He said this is absolutely unfounded. Oh, come on, Bart. Right. The guy is born on the winter solstice and he dies and resurrects at the spring equinox. I mean, how more astrological can you get?
Exactly.
It's a ridiculous claim.
But even the translations from, writing, right? I mean, we're actually Greek is a language, has a phonetic alphabet, right? But hieroglyphics, things like cuneiform don't. And before that, you have oral traditions. And when you start to go from oral traditions and then you move into a cuneiform and then a vertical language like a phonetic alphabet, you can lose things. Metaphors that were meant to, stories that were meant to tell how the stars move now become literal things like walking on water. Could be that star moving laterally on the horizon before it rises again.
Exactly. You personify the original story, and then after 4 or 5 generations, you may actually have forgotten why the original story exists, but you've only got the personification story now.
Because you're far from the oral tradition that was much more rich with singing and dancing and other symbols.
And that's what was in vogue a lot of times. What was in vogue in the time of Jesus was actually taking mythological figures and creating biographies of them walking on earth. That's not just with Jesus. That's with all of the Roman gods, Egyptian gods. I mean, Osiris being the first pharaoh and things like that. I mean. But then you also have, the way I look at it is, okay, we have a story of Batman that we grew up with, right? But, now as technology is advanced and, things of that nature, now if you look at these movies that we make, we literally are creating, we're putting historical figures around them, cities that actually exist, characters that actually exist. If we didn't know any better, we would think if someone came and had no idea what a movie was and they saw this is history now. Like we've created a story that became reality for us,
Yeah, especially if we burn a bunch of other documents.
Yeah, exactly. If you have an organization destroying everything else, right? Yeah.
Yeah. You could imagine probably 2,000 years from now, if the ability to communicate wasn't as strong through the internet as it is now, if it was the same as it was in ancient times, and we have these stories of Superman, Batman, 2,000 years from now, people could be arguing whether Batman was actually a real person or just a creation, which is exactly what we're doing now. A character that was created 2,000 years ago. We're saying, well, was he real or was he mythical?
Yep. And that's exactly what Mythicist Milwaukee is doing in supporting a film called Batman and Jesus, which we're launching at our conference in September 30th.
Yeah. I think you're going to like that.
One of the subtexts is, in fact, we're going to postulate just that.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And canonizing, or was it canonizing the Batman gospel?
Canonizing Superman.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. Canonizing, that's the word I was looking for.
I've seen the Church of Batman with my own style.
So, Mike, after all this research, and, you're an atheist activist, which we respect as well, and separation of church and state, which, again, people, if they know their history with what Constantine did and then all of his, successors did, and how dangerous that is to have a state-run religion. With Jesus, it doesn't matter. Does it matter whether he existed or not? In your opinion?
In my opinion, that's an interesting one. Whether Jesus existed or not, I think is not that relevant. And if people do want to believe that he existed and he didn't, again, it's not that relevant.
Yeah.
In the UK, though, there is a very relevant area where it comes into. There is a law in the UK which says every state-run school must hold a Christian assembly every morning, and there must be worship to a Christian God. So we have children from 4 to 16 years old in our state-run schools being forced every morning to pray to a God called Jesus. That's when it becomes important as to whether the person did or didn't exist. If you're an adult and you want to go to a church on a Sunday and worship a character called Jesus, that's your bag. But you cross the line when you say, and you must let our brethren go into your schools and force the children to worship Jesus every morning.
Right.
That's where the lines cross. So for me, that's why it's important to determine, look, hold on, this person absolutely did not exist. We should not be forcing our children to worship this person in school. You shouldn't be forcing children to worship any person, mythical or real, to be honest with you. And, but certainly not a mythical God.
Right.
Yeah, and with a 5 million strong Muslim minority in Britain, I imagine that this doesn't go over well there.
Oh,
right?
exactly.
Right. So the government then thinks, shoot, we've shot ourselves in the foot here. So what we'll do is the rule is for state-run schools. We will say you can create faith schools. You can create your own school. So we now have Muslim schools where Muslim children go, and instead of having to praise Jesus, they sit and quote the Quran in the mornings. I mean, 4 or 5-year-old children having to sit down, quote passages from the Quran.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. Religion is a private matter, and if parents want to take their children to a school or they want to take their children to a mosque, fair enough, but we've got plenty of places of worship in the UK. We do not need to be turning our schools into places of worship as well. So that's why I'm so, as Barton might say, that's why I'm an aggressive atheist. Yeah. I don't think I'm aggressive. If aggressive is just making someone aware of some facts in history that have been buried and lost, then I'm happy to be called aggressive. But
I mean, secularism shouldn't be the opposite of religion. It should be some of the governing principles of which all religions can agree upon.
Right. But I'll give you one for your arsenal too, Mike. Here in Milwaukee, a local happenstance, I guess the Catholic Church claimed bankruptcy in Milwaukee due to a lot of the people coming forward that were sexually abused, and there was hundreds and hundreds of kids that were sexually abused, and they preyed on deaf children's schools, which is there's a documentary on it. It's absolutely disgusting. But what they were able to do is take millions and hide it into a cemetery fund. And this is why it's important, again, why Jesus, whether or not he existed or not, because, and the courts ruled in the favor of the church to hide this money, or not hide, but place it, according to what the church was saying, into the cemetery fund, because the Catholic tradition states that these people that are in the cemetery will rise again when Jesus rises
bodies
again.
Accept, right? There was a bodily resurrection.
So because Jesus died, because Jesus is a historical person, died and resurrected, these people are going to do the same, when at the second coming. And so they've put millions that they've kept away from these the people that were
and you could create a First Amendment successful defense of this. Now, had you just believed if the Catholic Church would have said it's just the soul that resurrects, and not a bodily resurrection, then you wouldn't have been able to make the First Amendment.
It's
amazing.
The millions were used because the grounds have to be kept in good shape so these bodies can resurrect. That's another one for your arsenal as to why this argument matters.
Why it's so important.
Yeah.
Why it is so important. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it does astound me that the European courts actually passed a law which said the crystal ball, the mediums and the psychics and the people that read tarot cards, whenever they go to a place where they're going to do this and take money, they have to post a notice in front which says, "We are obliged by European law to inform you that what we are about to tell you might not necessarily come to fruition." And you just think,
entertainment purposes only.
Wow.
Yeah, that really should be at the front of every church pulpit, to be honest.
Well, I think, in the UK in general, I think they have an issue because they technically are a monarchy, correct? I mean, they have a state-run religion, and
it is. The Queen is the head of the church, and there is no separation between church and state, which is quite sad in the 21st century.
Oh, it is, and I'm not going to say the U.S. is any better because there's constantly these violations of it. That
I think we have different parts. I mean, we have different
parts. But
the First Amendment protects us from the Sharia courts, at least for now. Yeah. It's a stronger defense than to have religious tribunals. And being forced into this. I mean,
but just the other day, the Supreme Court allowed the purchase from the state to purchase this playground for a church. I mean, that's a clear, violation of the separation of church and state. We should not be using state dollars to purchase anything for any churches,
Yeah, and I think we just have different types
mosques
of problems.
or temples or whatever. And
if a religion was strong enough, it could support itself from the donations from its followers. It doesn't need taxpayers' dollars or taxpayers' pounds to do that.
Exactly.
But I believe in America and in the UK, it does. I mean, we don't have a theocracy, but we do have 26 bishops from the Church of England get automatic representation and seats in our House of Lords.
And state benefits.
To put over the Church of England's views on all matters. And people say, well, that puts a spiritual element on it. But we recently had a vote on euthanasia. Mm. Now, there is no way the bishops can vote on that without a bias.
Right.
And to me, it doesn't even require a vote. The only thing we should be discussing is making sure you don't get greedy children trying to kill off their parents. But the fact of whether someone has the right to end their own life if they're in severe pain, then that we shouldn't be voting on that. But when we do vote on it, we've got a very religious House of Commons and a very religious House of Lords, and they cannot be unbiased when they're making their decisions there. I think I did use the wrong word at the beginning of that. What is the word for taking your own life? Not suicide, but to end your life through pains.
Euthanasia.
It was you. I did get the right word.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can't get past a vote which makes that legal in our country, and then that really frustrates me. I don't see how anyone can turn around and say, no, you mustn't take your own life if you're dying of severe pain because my religion forbids it.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, if you want to suffer that pain, my love, that's your call, but
I certainly think we can debate on, the laws and how you would have to qualify, and that it probably shouldn't be an easy process. I think that's fine, but that's all a matter of secular law that can be debated.
Well, I think there was a British law, and forgive me, I'm a little hazy on this memory, but there was a British law that if you molested a child, the state would kill you, right? But you could not kill yourself because it was against the law. You couldn't take your own life. And the biggest thing was,
punishment.
Well, not only, they wouldn't give you your last rites. So the Catholic Church wouldn't give you your last rites. So what people started doing in this time frame, and I can put in the show notes, I can find the story, but it was absolutely disturbing, was they started molesting children just so the state would kill them and then give them their last rites.
And they get the last right and then get to heaven.
Yeah, and then get to heaven. So they were seeing this as a way, I don't want to live anymore, but I can't kill myself because I'm going to go straight to hell.
Bizarre.
And that's what happens. And, I got the story one thing that's been, I'm going to get your guys' take on this, but one thing that's really been messing with me lately is I started watching The Keepers on Netflix, and I started watching it and I ended up getting hooked. And if you don't know the story follows, and I truly suggest anybody watch this out there because it's so powerful and compelling. But the story follows a Catholic school in the 60s and 70s, and it follows these two priests in Baltimore in the United States.
No, it's fictional, right?
No, this is 100% real. And what it is these two priests are preying on these girls, these teenage girls in high school, and molesting them literally hundreds of times. And it got to the point where these priests, because in this time frame in Baltimore, the Roman Catholic Church was seen as the ultimate authority. And in this Catholic Church, like the priests were the ultimate, authority. And so there was no challenging the priests. There was no, talking back. So these priests are systematically raping these women or these girls, and are told, they're telling them, if you say anything, we're going to kill you. They're giving them the Holy Spirit through their penis in the form of cum. I mean, this is the stories that they're telling. And not only that, it got to the point where they started bringing in other adults from outside, police officers, people they know, whatever, that were raping these children. And they got away with it for 30, 40 years. One of the priests died in 2001, the other in 88. Never any issues. They never got caught or anything. And the thing that drives me crazy here is and the documentary is fantastic, but it's looking at it from a human perspective of, what could people have done to have helped this? The diocese in Baltimore was not very helpful. They didn't, go after these people. But why is it that Jesus and God are never on trial? Because they, if we're going to look at this from a human perspective, human beings are the worst. But these two supposedly represent the most powerful deities ever, the creators of us, yet they turn a blind eye to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rapes on teenage girls. Why are they never put on trial?
Right. Where is the really nice lightning strike when you need
exactly.
it? Right?
If he would have raped one girl and all of a sudden he mysteriously gets a disease that we never heard of and died, okay, well now, decades, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, why aren't they on trial? Why aren't these two gods on trial? How strong is your cognitive dissonance to see that and still say you're a Catholic?
Yeah, and still, yes, worship what it's portraying. If I could do this very, very quickly, actually, it's interesting you say that. We have a program in the UK called Grantchester. It's about a detective and his sidekick, who is a priest in the Church of England, who helps him solve cases. It's fictional, but 2 weeks ago there was a fantastic episode. The priest wants to marry a woman who has been divorced, and the priest's best friend, who is another priest, is gay, and he's trying to keep this a secret. And the priest is giving sermons each week, telling people how they should be happy, what they should be doing with their lives. But in the back of his mind, and the story puts it over, is he is absolutely miserable because he wants to marry this woman who's a divorcee, and his bosses, the Church of England, won't let him. And his best friend has just tried to commit suicide because he's gay and he can't deal with it. And that series ends up with the guy saying, "Do you know, we are not miserable, me and my friend, because of what it is we're doing. We're miserable because you are telling us it's wrong."
Right.
And it's you that's wrong.
Exactly.
And it was just a fantastic episode. And I thought, are they going to? I hope they play this out. But they put it all right. It's the BBC. They put it all right again the following week, and everything was cool with the church again. But that episode was very powerful.
Yeah. Well, and you constantly hear these stories of Boston Globe. This with the keepers. And the story, the anti-homosexual lifestyle, the misogynistic thing. But yet, for some reason, world leaders have to go and consult with the Pope just to make sure that he's on board. Like, seriously, for the Pope to come out and say anything negative about any other organization or any country in the world, yet he has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pedophiles in his employ. He should not be throwing stones at it. Clean up your own backyard before you say anything about anyone.
The Pope is as ethical as the man is. There shouldn't be any conferred honesty or objectivity or goodness because he is the Pope. You can. If he's a good man, then he's a good man. But you could. He could believe that,
but he could be a good man if he didn't. But again, if you're going to take the tradition and you're going to believe it, he has a direct line to God.
It confers.
He has a direct line to God.
Title. It confers some. It's an award. Your diploma. It confers achievement, but that's achievement that you've earned, right? This is unearned achievement.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to talk about, or if either one of you want to talk about one of his main advisors today and what happened with that.
No. I don't know too much about the story other than he has been charged by Australia for sex offences, a string of sex offences going over decades.
Now, he denies this, and he says he's going to Australia to clear his name. Right. I don't know anything about whether this is true or not, but I do know that if they're trying him, they feel like they have enough evidence.
And if you're going to take an organization and look at past practices, and then all of a sudden this comes out, I mean, it's like, you're innocent until proven guilty, but unfortunately he's in one of the biggest, largest criminal organizations that's ever existed that's been systematically doing this to innocent people for centuries. And it's like, you can claim you're innocent. I honestly don't believe it.
Right. Any organization can be corrupt, but the thing is that it's not any organization automatically can claim the blessing of God. Mm-hmm. That's my issue.
Yeah. Sorry, we totally got off topic there. But I mean, but that's something that I've really trying to grasp trying to get my head around and try and figure out with people that are religious. Doesn't matter if you're Hindu, Jewish, whatever. How can you see things like this constantly happen and still, believe that there's a God that is all good?
Well, I think we will have made some progress in the world the day a pope stands up and announces to the world that being gay is a biological function. And let's just put that to rest. But I fear that day will never come.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just imagine the pressure around him to, if he said something like that again, they were talking about him. And he's not, they're saying how progressive he is and how he's going to get killed. Like that was early on. Yeah. Obviously, I don't think people think that anymore. But early on, that was like the fear of how progressive he is. The fact that the Catholic Church can't be progressive in fear of their ruler being or their leader being killed. But even if we get
past, gays and priests could marry and premarital sex and all of that, there's still, as society advances, going to be questions about, we have the technology to clone people. Mm-hmm. Can we? Should we? Mm-hmm. What rights should people have? Can you grow your own organs or something? Can you have a dummy body that, kind of a brainless human that you've grown in a lab for organs? I don't think these ancient scriptures are going to help us, teach us anything about the ethics of this.
Yeah. And Islam, we see it today. We brought them up as far as, saying something bad about the Bible or saying something bad about Jesus in the early Christianity. But if you look at Islam today, it's kind of the same, where you can get killed for that. And it's ridiculous and it needs to stop.
Now, that is a very interesting point. And I try to make this analogy when I do my presentations throughout the UK, that what we're seeing with ISIS and Islam today was Christianity 500 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
We've got this persona of love, forgiveness, charity, philanthropy. That's a recent facade. That is a rebranding of the Christian message.
Yep.
We've only got to go back about 100 years. And the Church of England, which is quite innocuous now, was thoroughly ruthless, vile, and murderous. Mm-hmm. And so people see this imagery of ISIS and Islam, and they're utterly shocked. And then they'll go to their church on Sunday and pray to the Lord and give money to an organization which got into its position today by the exact same method.
Yep. Yeah,
and this is what people are not tuning into.
Yeah, you're one. I mean, absolutely. If you look at early Christianity, and that's why I love how you explain how it spread through war and bloodshed and killing of the innocents. It's no different than religions that you'll still see today, and religions that you'll see in the future. And you can make the same claim about Scientology in a lot of ways of how it's destroying families in a similar fashion. If you're not a part of us, we're going to destroy everything we can about you. Scientology.
You can join us, but you must never leave us.
Exactly.
And Christopher Hitchens, one of your countrymen, said that not all religions are bad in the same way all the time. And I think that's the case, right? The Catholic Church is not the Catholic Church of 500 years ago, 1517. The Inquisitions are going on. Ferdinand and Isabella are completing the Reconquista.
Yeah, but again,
this is very different than.
But I don't give credit to religion at all. I give credit to humanity and society advancing, and that's what the Catholic Church has been forced to progress based on, even the ascension of Mary wasn't even accepted as doctrine until the 1950s because, society was going in that direction of allowing women to have, responsibility and leadership and all that stuff. And it has to, and the next thing they will have to do is same-sex. That can happen in the Islamic
world. And that's why I think Majid Nawaz is in the Prevent program over there. Like that's the way to do it. You, blend it with modernity and have them modernized. Get it.
Well, it has to, or it's not going to survive, and that's what the Catholic Church and Christianity in general has proven over time. It won't survive if it doesn't evolve, and
We've also got to make society realize how many phrases and ideas that the Church have hijacked. If someone is doing good work, and we hear the concept, he's a good Christian. He doesn't want to harm anybody. He does good work. He's philanthropic. No, that's not a good Christian. That's just a good person. Mm-hmm. He may happen to go to church, but if you are saying the only reason he's doing this is because he goes to church and has been told if you do good, you'll get a divine reward, but if you don't do good, you'll get a divine punishment. That's not good morals. That's blackmail.
No,
that's true.
It's if you are doing this because you want to, you're just a good person. You're a good human. Good morality doesn't come from Christianity or Islam. They just hijacked the concept years ago and told everybody, if you want to be good, God is telling you through me what it is you need to do to be good. It was just a control tool. So, there are so many concepts like that are hijacked by the religions that are taught in our schools that are absolutely not the brainchild of a church or a religion. It's just humanity. So we are teaching children the wrong thing. And we're almost saying to children in schools, like, if you want to be good, you're going to have to pick one of these religions.
Yep.
Because if you don't pick one of these religions, you're not going to be good. You're going to be one of those atheists.
That even in society, you'll get people that are religious that defend one another because at least they believe in something. And I've heard that phrase several times. At least they believe in something. Well, but they don't understand that the internal bigotry and infighting that exists is because, you guys all believe something different.
And any belief system, even non-religious, can become corrupted.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Any belief system. You're right. Unfortunately, one controls your afterlife and, so.
There's unique. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate the talk. I mean, take a look, folks, if you want to look at it, the first epistle of Clement, the epistle of Barnabas, some interesting stuff, that the number 70 piece is neat. The schisms, we appreciate your work. You definitely raised some good points and questions, and hopefully we'll have some people look into it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mike, we got to talk to you for hours. Now, do you have an organization in the UK that focuses on separation of church and state?
Yes, there are organisations. I'm not a member of any of these organisations myself. Okay. I try to stay away. I run a campaign which I call No Tory, which is No to Religious Indoctrination. It's a one-man campaign, and I'm just trying to make people aware that really, I not only should we not have religious worship in schools, I don't think we should have religion in schools, save for where it crosses into history.
Sure,
we shouldn't have it as a specific lesson. It has no content. We shouldn't have religious representation in Parliament, and they certainly shouldn't be getting our hard-earned tax money. That's where I come from in the UK. But there are organisations which do campaign for separation of church and state.
Yeah,
I think we are
one law for all
on that. We've only just got rid of the blasphemy law in 2008. So that's how progressive we are.
Yeah,
Ireland is still trying to. They got to catch up.
Yeah,
they got to catch up. Yes.
Yeah, I think we're all for teaching religion in schools as mythology. That's what they are
or
actually
comparative religion from a secular point of view.
Yeah, I think mythology because that's where they all started, and that's where they all started. So, Mike, thank you again so much for joining us, and we'd love to have you on again in the future. So, thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay,
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Myth Informed. Myth Informed is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasick. Associate producers Fritz Blondone and Kristen Whitaker Hood. Engineer Josh Benishek. Technical consultant Jason Lawson. And hosts Brian, Dimitri, Jacob, and Joseph. Every week we produce a new podcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Mythicist Milwaukee also brings major secular conferences and debates to the Milwaukee area, along with community events, both local and online. To support us in bringing future events, become a member at mythicistmilwaukee.com to receive member-only benefits. You can also visit mythicistmilwaukee.com and hit the donate button located at the bottom of each page to place a financial donation amount of your choice. And now, the closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
Poseidon in the sea. Isis of fertility and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next to die? There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be